Hello, my name is Jared Newbrander, and I am presenting Counseling with Older Americans. As adults, there's this great shared communal experience, which is childhood. Hitting your developmental milestones and markers. We all know what that's like. We've all experienced those same things. However, when it comes to being elderly, most of us who haven't crossed that threshold don't actually know what it's like, but we think we do. A lot of myths and untruths are prevalent in American society about what it means to be older. I hope with this presentation to help educate a little bit, elucidate on what it's actually like and some of their strengths and values, as well as the challenges faced by older Americans. What does it mean to be elderly? When are you elderly? Uh, Most people say you're as old as you feel, and after the research I've done here, I think that's kind of true. Um, in America, 65 is retirement age, so I guess that's the benchmark we have to use for entrance into the older American culture. But research shows that most people actually feel younger than their chronological age, and they don't mind most of the things that come along with it. It's not until really that they start the downward spiral, and we'll talk about that later, where kind of right at the edge close to death, where they really start to feel like being an older person is negative. Most of the 65 and older population see these years as very positive. They have more freedom to follow what excites them, whether that's family or hobbies or their dreams, whatever it's going to be, because there's typically a more financial freedom and a better sense of who they are as a person. They understand who they are, what they like, what they don't like, and life is less volatile. Uh, Typically, friendships and familial relations become a much deeper connection, and they're able to really value how they're spending their time and who they're spending their time with. Studies found that adults that engage in a lot of social activity are much less likely to experience cognitive decline like memory loss or anything like that. Now that we've covered some of the positives, let's look at some of the negative aspects or challenges faced by the older American. These are the kind of things that as a counselor is likely would come up in the course of therapy as something that they're struggling against. Real quick in bullet points, we have ageism, which is discrimination based on age. Sexually transmitted disease happens to be a large problem. We'll talk about that. Cognitive decline, mental and emotional issues that happen as a result of decreased cognition. Abuse, neglect, substance abuse, and depression. That's all things that are pretty common experiences for the older adults. So ageism. Neil Butler came up with this term to kind of help people understand how discrimination against age is similar to how we discriminate against race or sex. America is a very youth-centric culture. We value youth, vitality, beauty, all these things that we're saying in the advertisements we show, the TV commercials that play, that being old is negative and being old, there's no value there. We devalue a whole class of people, and it happens pretty regularly without much thought given to it. Becca Levy actually did an interesting project where it showed when elderly people are exposed to this negative imagery or they hear something negative about their peer group, that they actually perform worse on measures of competency and memory. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more they hear how bad they are and how useless they are, they suddenly feel that way about themselves, and it's a horrible cycle. Sex. It's a pretty big deal for just about everyone after we reach puberty. But in American culture, we like to think, grandma and grandpa, they really put that behind them. We view the elderly as kind of asexual, beyond those base needs. But that's not so. People have their desires and drives, and they're still intact, especially with the different medicines available now to help assist in that process. There's a lot of that going on. And a big issue that comes out is sexually transmitted disease. It's the older American community, they're excited to have their freedom again, and they're out there and they're trying whatever that interests them, and that's fine. But what we need to see is an education in sexual hygiene, sexual safety. AIDS has become a huge problem in the retiree community, especially in the retiree states like California or Florida, Arizona, those kind of areas. In South Florida alone, nearly 50% of all AIDS cases are diagnosed in people older than the age of 50. It's really ballooning out of control. As a counselor, you may not have an issue telling a teenager to use protection, but when you're dealing with somebody in the older demographic, you need to have that same upfront attitude and let them know that it's a real possibility they could get some permanent, life-changing situations coming about from promiscuity. Cognitive decline. This is a big one for Western cultures. Whether it's a negative attitude that old people are losing their faculties and they shouldn't be allowed as much freedom as they have, or if it's coming from a place of pity or love where somebody's just trying to protect, and wants to look out for them. Cognitive decline is not as prevalent as the society wants everybody to believe. As human beings, as we age, our cognitive faculties, they slow, but they don't diminish. Now, there is issues with Alzheimer's disease and other things where it can come up, but for the most people's experience through aging, it's not a significant issue as Western culture wants everyone to believe. This is one of the biggest issues with being an older American is the constant questioning and trying to strip away your right to autonomy. People are always wanting to help you or make sure you're not a danger to yourself. And imagine how that would make you feel when you're just living your life and people are constantly questioning your ability to drive, your ability to take care of your finances, to take care of the home. And that can be seen even in just the way people communicate with elderly folks. They automatically raise their voice much higher because they assume that their hearing is failing. Or, they speak really kind and sweeties and always call these nice, endearing terms, trying to put them at ease, but it's demeaning. I don't know, you don't talk to me that way. Well, why would you do that with an older person? And then there's the issue of what to do when there is cognitive decline. As problems start to present themselves, how much care is needed? Usually the family kind of steps in to help with that if there's any family available. If not, maybe an assisted living center, if not a full nursing home kind of situation. But is it appropriate? If somebody's able to get by with just about everything and only needs a little bit of help, but their caregiver is overbearing with taking away their rights and their capabilities, it can be extremely frustrating. And that segues into abuse and neglect. Abuse comes around in a lot of different forms. There's physical abuse like hitting or shaking, sexual abuse including rape or coerced nudity, psychological and emotional abuse, verbal harassment, humiliation, or neglect, failure to provide adequate care or living environment, or even financial abuse and exploitation. People take advantage of the elderly with the online scams and trying to trick them into paying for something they don't need. And as a counselor, you may have a situation where the client is fully capable, fully autonomous, but you're going to see some issues of neglect. Perhaps it's being able to care for themselves, hygiene, safe driving etiquette, these different things that might present themselves, but because they are autonomous, they don't realize how much of an impact to their safety it is. So having to broach that subject and help coach them to understand what the situation is. In older culture, medication is just the way of life. The saying, better living through medication kind of applies. But here we're seeing 17% of adults age 60 and older abuse alcohol or prescription drugs. And a lot of times it's not purposeful. 17% of adults are having a substance abuse problem, older adults that is, but only around 2.5 to 3% of them are actually diagnosed with a substance abuse issue. If the average older adult is taking 5 prescription drugs a day, and each one has its own set of rules of when you take it, how you take it, what you can have with it, what you can't have with it. And a lot of people in the retired community, they like to drink alcohol, and sometimes that's going to have an adverse reaction with medication they're taking. It's hard to keep track, and it's hard to know. It's confusing, and sometimes that can really be a problem. Depression's another big challenge for this culture. It's not a natural part of aging by any means, but the older Americans exposed to more depressing events. When somebody loses a loved one or a friend, that's depressing no matter what age you are. But in that culture, there's more instances of that happening more frequently. So you're going to see people that are more prone to having a depressive issue, and you got to be on the lookout for that and really help coach them through that. Whether it's financial problems or social isolation, losing loved ones, medical issues, or even just declining faculties if cognitive issues is a problem. It's more associated with being old than actually feeling old than actually being old. It's more often the males in this demographic that get depressed than the females. Men depend more in their older age and feel like there's less, they feel like more has been taken away from them. Women typically feel more freedom. They feel ready to go and experience life anew. And then there's the big problem of how you feel about aging in general. If you, being an American, and you have this indoctrinated idea that being old is bad, negative, and then what happens when you grow up and you become an old person yourself? You're going to turn those feelings inside and inward, and that's going to bring you right down. So you may have these clients with real issues of like almost a self-loathing that they're going to have to process and work through. Suicide, like with any depressive issue, is a real concern. The rates of suicide in the over 65 population is one of the highest among peer groups, and that's because there's more instances of depressive episodes that can happen. So again, when you're dealing with a client that's depressed, monitoring them and really using your clinical skills is going to be the best. Speaking of clinical skills, your best practice is going to be emphasizing their strengths rather than their weaknesses, and helping to foster a sense of independence and diminish dependence kind of issues. We've been talking a lot about autonomy. You want to promote decision making and action taking. If they feel that that's been taken away from them, show them how it's not. Show them the decisions they can make and their power in the situation and how to act on that. I mentioned earlier that kind of downward spiral. They call it like a geriatric syndrome. It's almost as everything's going fine, and then when one thing happens, maybe it's a slip and fall or a health scare or something, all of a sudden all these issues start to compound. Researchers have been trying to find the best way to define this concept and put it out there for treatment and awareness. The problem is nobody really quite agrees on inclusion rates, and it gets really lost in the mess of it. But ultimately, showing respect, care, and guidance when one of these events occurs can help prevent another one to the best that your ability can. And sometimes if it's physiological, there's no helping it. But other times it's a mental thing. We got to keep the depressive feelings away and keep spirits up to keep it out of a cycle. Client advocacy, that's going to happen a lot with the family members or the caregivers. Like I said before, people want to overprotect, overindulge, and try to remove as much decision making away from the older American as they can to protect them from themselves. And that's really going to instill issues of anger, resentment, and hostility. That can be tough. So talking with the family and helping everybody understand where the boundaries are and what needs to be done is going to be really beneficial. Or if the older client is still working, some people work through their retirement, but we have all kinds of workplace ageist attitudes or ageist policies that come through because a lot of people they don't get called on it. They feel you should retire, you should go home. So if I make workplaces a little bit worse, maybe they'll do that rather than fight it. And that's not okay. I mean, it's completely illegal. So in summation, working with the elderly American can be really positive. Uh, the council needs to focus on their autonomy, the client's autonomy, and really letting them know what it is that they're facing and how best to keep that autonomy and express to others when there's a problem. I think a lot of times the issues get swept under the rug because people don't want to speak up. They don't want to cause trouble, but that's where those issues lie.